And yes, we are live. Sounds everything's good. Excellent. So, welcome to Youth Rugby Discussion. This is a podcast focusing on Youth Rugby Union. We're based in US New England, so that's what we're mostly focusing on. We are a collection of current and past coaches, administrators, parents, basically just involved in youth rugby. Now, although some of us may sit on different boards, we do not represent those boards. Everything that we say here is just basically us discussing topics that are relevant to us. So please join us for today's discussion. And today we're going to be discussing starting a community-based team. And what we'll do is we'll go off the top. Everybody say hello so we can associate names to voices. Alan, you go first.
Hi, yeah, this is Coach Allen with the Rentham Barbarians.
Hi, this is Chris, rugby dad. That's probably worthy of note here. Past rugby coach, high school, youth, college, men's level.
My voice is Daniel Mejia.
I'm Kate McCabe, current coach at Belmont Girls Rugby.
I'm Matt Pamela, head coach at Marshfield High School Boys Rugby and former coach of the South Shore Anchors Men's Club.
And I am Skylar, a high school rugby player and rugby nerd. Kind of coach middle school and flag, but I don't think that really counts.
That counts. Absolutely, that counts. All right. So, as we mentioned, today's topic is going to be starting a community-based team, and we're lucky we have a couple of members, co-hosts that have started clubs in the past. Chris, do you want to get us going with some of the experiences that you've had in starting a club?
Sure. But first of all, I can't take the credit for starting clubs. A lot of help along the way. I've been part of a team that started a club, and there's been very important people that did the brunt of the work on the way. But sure, I'd love to talk about a couple different experiences that I've had. One, also let's start with starting a mostly youth rugby program in Massachusetts, and what that was like, and some of the things that worked pretty well for us. And maybe some of the challenges, and then I'll also reflect back on what it was like to start to be part of the start of a high school rugby team in Oregon back in 2002, 2003. So first, about starting this, about being part of the team that started the South Shore Sharks was another guy named Dan. He did tremendous amount of work when we started the South Shore Sharks. He started the South Shore Sharks. He was an employee of the town park and recs department, and so he had an in with that. He was motivated. He was tremendously motivated to get this going. So he saw this opportunity that our town was missing rugby, and he wanted to share rugby like the rest of us do, and he was able to use his position in the Park and Recs department to sort of create some rugby clinics, some rugby experiences, and eventually about 2012 timeframe, a rugby program where kids would come out and train. So kids would can train, and I say that the kids could come out and train because there was no one for the youth kids to play around that time frame. There wasn't a league that was established at the time, so we were just going out there and playing rugby. But I'd like to say that one of the things that worked really well is having Dan be in the Park and Recs department, right? How important was it with a guy who could get field space for us, manage the communication the same way that other Park and Rec departments communications go out, so we were able to reach more students, and then also have the infrastructure. I don't even know what all the infrastructure was because Dan handled it all, but the infrastructure that comes with the Park and Recs program, so that we could, he had the waivers all squared away, and registrations were all squared away, and that sort of thing. So really, and my role in that organization was as the director of rugby. So he took me on as director of rugby. So when I came there, Dan took care of all the administrative thing, all the hard work there, and it was just for me just to focus on coaching kids in rugby. One thing I will say though about that I was a piece of the puzzle that made what I consider the South Shore Sharks a successful organization, because Dan was able to reach out to me, somebody who's passionate about rugby, and my family, I had four or three at the time, three and a baby, three of the kids at the time playing rugby. My wife was also part of the board as well, and so he sort of got a pretty good chunk of people there, just with us. And another thing that we got there is just a little bit of funding, just to pay for the jerseys and the website, just like it was like $500 or something like that, just to get us going until the registration started coming in. So I think so I'm going to pause there for a second if anybody has any questions or thoughts before I move on to the next things that were working for the South Shore Sharks at the time.
So not necessarily a question, but I think as you mentioned, I made it sound like you started a club, and you made it very clear that it's a group of people, a team, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess one person could go about getting it started, but I love the fact that you made it very clear that this is like you want to bring your clan with you. You need support to be able to get this going, because I mean, the stuff that you just started saying that Dan took care. My head just spins thinking about these things. I would walk away and say, no, there's no way I could do any of that, because that's just not my forte. So I love the fact that you pointed that out. And let me ask you, was Dan? Did he have a background in rugby, or was he just parked and rec and realized, hey, maybe we can bring another sport into the mix?
No, he did. He played rugby. He played rugby in college. I bet he did have a background in sports other than that too. He was a big baseball guy as well. So I mean, he had a pretty good big background in sports administration, so that's the short story. But I'm going to get on to another one, and the types of things that he did. One is fundraising, right? He did a lot of fundraising, and he had sort of a strategy and vision for the program as well. So yeah, he had a pretty strong background, and he did play rugby, right? We find that to be the case, right? He was so passionate about it, right? And it was one of the things that it wouldn't have worked without him, right? He was so passionate about it. He took care of all the things. He was banging on doors for fundraising. He was, had to influence the park and recs department, and also getting people to come and play. Because remember, one of the things that was a challenge, is probably not relevant for most clubs, is we didn't have anybody to play back then. I think it was the second year that we actually had a couple teams to play against, flag rugby at the youth rugby level. So all right, so let me see. Next, I think I want to maybe impress. I started talking about fundraising too, and the other piece, actually, Matt, you mentioned to it offline about insurance too, right? So since we're part of the Park and Recs, we didn't yet have to worry about CIPP and other administrative items. It was run through the town. It was a good way for us to sort of get the seed germinated until the next year, where we took a next step. And I kind of want to head to the next year pretty shortly, unless anyone has any questions.
Can I ask a question? So it started out as a not a high school program yet, right? Because it's all non-contact in terms of like I'm just thinking in terms of insurance and getting the town to sign on to it.
Right. It was.
Okay.
Yeah, it totally was flag, and it was flag. I almost went off on an anecdote about, like, we weren't sure at the time when we should have flag and when we should have tackle, because there was no real program for us at the time yet. Yeah. And so there was a source of debate, and that might get into where the state rugby, the state youth rugby organization, whatever it's called, this week, comes into play. So and that probably actually is a good segue. One more point about this that was really helpful is that while this was a town park and recs department, we were pulling from several other towns, right? About half of our kids, maybe a little bit more than half of our kids, were from the town of Whitman, but we were also accepting kids from other neighboring towns, or as far south as Plymouth, as a matter of fact, that some kids would go, and so kids would come from, but also, so we were able to pull from other towns. And actually that first year, let's just say there was 30 kids that were involved in the program from young age. Coach Shaggy's kid probably was 5 or at the time, something like that. And then to kids that were in high school, they're probably still under 15, which is sort of counts as middle school, but there were high school kids in that program too. So there were all various ages. So we try to split them up into the younger groups and older groups, and do what we could to have them just have a good time and throwing the rugby ball around and learning the game. But that was as far as I recall year one. Maybe we were able to have a scrimmage with some kids from the Irish Wolfhounds in year one. Year two is a little bit different. Year two is when I think that's when the Rentham Barbarians. I think we'll hear about that here pretty shortly. When the Rentham Barbarians came, but this is also when we got involved with our state, MIRO, Massachusetts Youth Rugby Organization in our state, but the local state governing body, where we went through the process of getting to be part of the state youth rugby programs and hooked in with a few other teams. And now we had this group of, I think at the time was three teams that we could play against, and it sort of started to legitimize us a little bit more. But I think the point again is there at that time, year two for us. But that time now we've got to make sure that we've got our 501c3 all squared away, and that we're following the laws or the guidelines of the USA Rugby and the state governing body, and we're paying some more dues to those organizations. And all that work again was done by Dan. Well, I just got to focus on rugby for a while. And again, we probably grew some of the organization that time. We got more parents involved, right? Again, important. We did have some parents that had rugby backgrounds, but we also have parents without rugby backgrounds that are just parents with good sports backgrounds and good levels of engagement that helped us along the way, especially in the year two. So that probably wraps up my short conversation on the South Shore Sharks for years 1 and 2 in particular, how we got it started, where we had the pieces of the puzzle. We had somebody that was involved in the park and rec, somebody who was passionate, who was going to push through the park and recs, and then through the state governing body, what it was known at the time, and then somebody else who had a rugby background that could focus on rugby, and some parents that were engaged in a pretty good group of kids, 20, 30, 40 kids that were showing up and playing rugby. And I think those were some of the key elements. Then when the kids get a little bit older, that's when, and this is a few years later, and at that time I'm not really involved. That's when we started to form a high school side. Those kids grow up, and we're part of the overall rugby program, and the Sharks are able to put together a semblance of a high school side. So we really did start at the bottom at youth, and then the high school side has been growing through that youth organization. That's what I get to say about that.
So the high school side came sort of, it evolved. It grew out of the fact that you guys put together a youth program first. So the kids kind of, did they age out of youth and make it up to high school, and now you were able to have high school, or was it both? You then also attracted high school players.
Yeah, it is both. It is both. I have to be fair and say that I moved a couple times during this time. So I left the organization, and a few years later, my kids came back, and we were still building towards that high school program. And it's a mixture of both. One, you do have kids matriculating through middle school, through youth to middle school, to high school, but you also get new kids in high school as well, kids that are maybe switching from other sports. Or otherwise, that's what's going. And just to be fair too, the Sharks are sort of a bubble team. For high school, they often combine with other teams to make it work out, and there's a few other programs in the area. So right now, the Sharks really focus on youth and continue to focus on youth, and some of those kids grow out of the youth program to play for other clubs as well. A lot of kids go to play for the local high schools, because there's several high schools in the South Shore: Hingham, Marshfield, Scituate, Weymouth, Hanover, all have programs in the South Shore. So we're feeding those high schools as well. Does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, and that's interesting that it's, you guys are the feeder team kind of to perhaps your own high school side, but also to the actual to the teams that are tied to high schools in the area. That's cool.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
cool.
I think so. Yeah, at least that's the way it is in my mind anyway. I don't know if Alan's story with the Barbarians, I think, has a lot of similarities. And by the way, correct me if I misremember anything from 7 years ago, 8 years ago, but has some similarities. And maybe we switch to Alan so I don't have to do all the talking, and
Yeah.
then we come back and talk about my experience in Oregon, which was very different and something I do want to talk about though.
I was enjoying the break, Chris. Letting you just roll. It was interesting to hear your history as well. Yes, so Rentham was actually similar and different all at the same time. So we were founded by an English guy who'd grown up playing rugby back in England, wanted to introduce his son to the sport, and living in Rentham had nowhere to go. There was no rugby in the area, and he had a very particular plan in mind that was about just a totally inclusive club with no great aspirations to be anything other than let's play rugby. And so he kind of tried once or twice to get started, like 2010, 2011, 2012, and picked up two or three people or two or three other parents with their kids just playing pickup games, and that's kind of when I got involved. So similar to you, Chris, I didn't start the club. I was there kind of early, but not the guy after getting it going. So when myself and my son joined, there was probably 5 or 6 families just kind of playing, and and you needed dads and mums and kids playing to actually have enough people to do any form of rugby, really, of any excitement. But we were just doing pickup stuff and just using the fields that the Rentham had. And during one of those sessions, the head of the rec department, Jeff Plimpton, who is a name in baseball and has a pretty advanced baseball program in the area, came riding past and commented to Chip, is like, what are you guys doing? He's like, we're trying to get, just doing some pickup rugby, and we kind of thought we were all going to get thrown out. But no, Jeff was fantastic. He said, well, why don't you just come and sign up with us, and we'll rec team with you. And that's how we got started. So we didn't do 501c3, and we didn't do organization and any of those things. That the town just embraced us immediately. They basically said, if you register directly through us as a rec team, you've got nothing to do. You just show up and coach. And so we moved fields quite a lot. We traveled around a little bit in Rentham itself, and again, like the Sharks, our first season or two was really just us, pick up rugby amongst ourselves. We reached about a critical mass of maybe 30 players, and at that point we had kind of our first jamboree, but it wasn't a jamboree, which was the Wolfhounds came down, the Myro team came down to help. I think North Shore came down as well, and we had a classic rugby morning of dark grey skies, light drizzle, cold and miserable. It couldn't have been more perfect as far as I was concerned, and everyone had a great time. And that was probably late 2013, beginning of 2014, and by then, so everything you're saying, Chris, we got to meet Dan. We got playing against the Sharks. We got regular established sessions against Wolfhounds, and we kind of grew from there. And so we were always the little team. We felt we were the little team. A lot of kindredness to the Sharks, playing against the behemoth that was the Wolfhounds, and over time have become more comparable. We have a similar experience going into high school as well, which is that the first probably half dozen kids, the eldest half dozen kids when we founded the club, all kind of graduated beyond what we could offer as a program. Trying to form a high school team of 3 players wasn't really going to cut it, and so they all moved on to the Wolfhounds. And then we had 1 or 2 kind of almost false starts to get middle school and high school teams going. But about 4 years ago, we really got our first high school team together, and now we're literally starting to coach. Well, come the spring season, and I'm confident we'll have one of some form. This will be our first graduating year of players who, at least some of them, have been with us since probably second or third grade, and will be. Actually, I can't be right doing the math. Will you mathematicians help me out here? But anyway, they've been with us since very early on, and now they're in their seniors. And the end of this, the end of 2021 summer season will be their final year with us as they go on to graduate onto college and things. But yeah, so all our difficulty of starting, we actually, because Rentham has been so fantastic to us, we didn't experience that. We were able to embrace, they embraced us immediately, and we've seen huge value to remain close to them the whole way through.
Yeah,
that's really awesome.
Yeah, that is fairly fulfilling. I agree. One of the things that I think you heard through both the Sharks and the Rentham story is that we started off with the rec department. I actually don't think that's typical, and so that's interesting. That we had that similar start, but I think a lot of clubs start out as part of a youth club, as part of a bigger, one of the bigger clubs in the organization, or by kicking off as the 501c3, and so that's interesting. That I don't know if that's normal or not, but it worked for these two clubs.
Seems like, I think, with a rec department that has the facilities, i.e. the space, field space is what you need to get started for flag at least, and an openness to a new sport. It's very easy to do. I think if the facilities are limited, or there's no openness to sport, then maybe the rec departments become difficult to deal with. But let's say our experience was fantastic, and we had nobody on the inside. We do now, but only because we're a rec team. So now, Steve, who's our president, is on the rec committee, but because he's the president of the club, not the other way around.
Yeah, cool. One of the things that I thought was similar about our stories, it sounds like to me, is that a founder, a champion who is engaged, and then again an engaged community. So, coaches that knew the game and loved the game, like yourself, Alan. Those two things to me were quite similar. One of the things that's different about you than, let's say, the Boston Irish Wolfhounds and then the South Shore, a lot of the South Shore Sharks, not all, but a lot of the South Shore Sharks are former or the children of the players from the South Shore, and I think the same thing goes when my kids involved with the Irish Wolfhounds. A lot of the Irish Wolfhounds youth organization are children of the folks that are in the Irish Wolfhounds club. But does Rentham have that same thing? Did you have that sort of built-in community of passionate rugby parents, or did you find yourself sort of creating that passion, sort of conjuring it from nothingness?
Well, I think probably the key is we don't have a local adult rugby club. There was one we heard rumored up, looking to get started up in the Milford area, which is probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes up 495 from Rentham. But we've not heard more than that. And then the next closest one, actually, bizarrely, is going to be the Wolfhounds. Wherever closer adult club to us. So most of the coaches are all impassioned former rugby players who vicariously through much more athletic children than they are, and probably at least for some of us ever were. And we've been lucky. We've been very acquisitive of coaches that have showed up saying, "Hey, I found you guys online. Want my kids to play rugby because I played rugby at college, high school. When I was a child growing up in a foreign country. Check whichever box counts." And they then volunteer to become coaches. A certain Daniel Mayhoff kind of falls into that camp, as far as I'm aware. And what we found with the parents is that, for whatever reason, they've stumbled across rugby and tried to give their kids a turn, or their kids have been interested. And I would say probably 2/3 of the parents, especially dads, have lamented the fact that they didn't find rugby until they showed up to join us. And wish they played at college, or wish they played at high school. And early on, what we found was really good, because one of the problems I find with any sport, if the parents don't understand the sport, that conversation doesn't take place, or the "hey, it's on TV, should we watch it together" doesn't take place so often. And so what we used to do, again, way back when, in the early days, we would, in a fall season, do parents versus kids. And so, you can imagine sort of 8 through 12-year-old kids finally getting a chance to run rings around their parents and be encouraged to do that. And so that would get the kids excited because they're playing their parents, but equally it would get the parents excited because all of a sudden, the drug that is rugby was getting tasted, and it was done in a super safe, easygoing environment because you're playing with the kids, they're not going to hurt you. And we're only playing touch, so it's just moving the ball around. But all the things that make rugby fantastic, they get exposed to immediately. And we found that really garnered a lot of commitment from parents to the club and to helping us out. And so we bizarrely are now going through that 501c3 program only because we've reached a point where we feel we need to think about sustainability and longevity of the club as players are going through the system. And what's interesting to us is the amount of parents who are volunteering to help us.
You can do that yourself.
And some of those parents have been with us for a while. Some are just coming in. Many of them have no rugby background at all. But yeah, so we haven't benefited from local adult rugby clubs, but we have benefited from adult players. But equally, we're finding parents are impassioned by the sport.
And it's funny listening to this. Oh, sorry, go Kate.
No, I was just going to say one of the things, like the parents that are offering to help with this process, do some of them have no experience with rugby, but instead have experience like doing that kind of administrative work with their other youth sports?
We've had, one dad who's an attorney volunteered to help us all the paperwork from the legal side of things. And as far as we know, never played rugby. His son's only been with the club for 2 years, 1 year of which is a pandemic lockdown. And it was like, hey, this has been great. He's loved it. I'm happy to give you, 4 or 5, 10 hours of my time just to help you get the paperwork sorted out. Same on the financial side of things. So yeah, these are just people happy to help out and just take us to the next level. I should have commented on it more clearly. I think a lot of what it's about is the community that is rugby, and the mindset that comes with rugby about, and we've talked about this time and time again on this podcast. It's the culture that's the sport. It's the fact that we're all in this together. It's a game about camaraderie. It's a game about people supporting each other. It's not a game about crushing the opposition so much. Winning's a byproduct of the fun. And I think a lot of the parents pick up on that, and they see that community as a consequence.
I just asked because it's interesting, like, as we've had parents that have gone through like have high schoolers in our program that are like potentially looking into creating some kind of youth program. I have parents that know nothing about rugby, but know a lot about interacting with Parks and Rec and how to organize a youth program because they did that for their kids playing soccer or, Pop Warner football or whatever. And so they get to do, like, I know nothing about that. And it's really interesting to be like, oh, there's this whole aspect of youth sport that, that can be capitalized on by engaging parents.
Yeah, and it's funny thinking about some of the similarities and differences from the past episode. We were focusing more on the high school based teams. I'm seeing here some big similarities. Or it's that one champion that says, yes, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to help start a club. Whether you're doing it a community based like a club like Chris and Alan are talking about, or whether it's at a high school, it's usually that champion that says, if they're a teacher or a coach, yes, I'm going to get a club started. The similarities there are very, very interesting. So it's kind of like, what can we do to give these people that want to start a team all the support they can to make it easier for them? And then the other one, a big difference is if you're a community-based club like the one we're talking about here, I can bring parents and use them, not as coaches because they'd have to get paperwork done, but I can use them, as a semi-autonomous Bosch bag, or we can recruit them into being some aspect of the rugby community, whether it's simply just, you're very impassioned and you're great to have around to, oh my goodness, you actually have, a skill that we can leverage into this. That's something that I see Alan just mentioned it. It's just awesome when you can do that. Is that something that high school, Kate and Matt, is that something you'd, because I heard you talking about how cool that would be. Is that something you can do? Can you leverage a parent and say, hey, can you help me with X, Y, and Z in a high school club, in a high school team?
I think in a single school scenario that's overseen by like the state interscholastic athletic association. In fact, that's probably something that they have very clear guidelines for what can be done outside of a system. There's some fundraising, there are booster clubs, there are things like that, but also the point of having that, having it be within the umbrella of the school system and then the state, athletic association, is to have it set up by an external organizer, right? So I think I would be uncomfortable with leveraging certain parents in certain ways. It would potential, but that's simply because of the system that I'm in, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And as you said, there are some channels that you could bring these parents in, like a booster club, be part of the booster club, type of thing. For a community-based team, which we're talking about here, it's a little bit looser.
Yeah.
So we can say, yeah, hey, who wants to help with, the jamboree next week? Does somebody want to deal with, making sure we got the pizzas? Now, we've got a lot more to deal with ourselves. The perception is, I would think there's a lot more details that we would have to deal with, space, time, getting all that stuff, getting the food, all that kind of stuff. Whereas things that are associated with the school, maybe, transportation, all that kind of stuff, there's a structure around it that you don't have to worry about it. So we have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. But then again, we can bring in some people to grow the community. So that's an interesting, difference there. That works one way and the other.
These high schools probably don't have to organize the pizzas, Daniel. They
Yep.
probably have someone doing pizza for them.
Yeah.
They're missing the spirit of
I saw a club mom or team mom usually on the years where I can find one that's good and helpful. Take care of some of that stuff. I mean, for years and years before we were varsity, one of the team moms would wash the jerseys for me and that type of stuff. But I agree. In schools, you take on a lot of liability when you let a parent get too close to the program. And it's something that always makes me nervous. But in the club system, that's not a problem.
It's almost your only option in some ways. I mean, I'm not trying to demean the commitments from coaches, but we predominantly start as parents.
Yeah.
I think we were 6-7 years into the Barbarians before we had our first non-parent coach.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot. And when you look at youth sports, I mean, I've got a lot of older cousins who've had kids come through and graduate high school. And, my cousins, the parents coached them in t-ball, coached them in softball, coached them in youth soccer, coached them in football. And some of them only played one or two of those sports and coached sports they didn't. But the downfall of that too is that once the kid matriculates to the next level up, so does the parent.
Yeah, actually, so that's. I mean, I don't know whether this takes us off topic, but that's actually been a lot of the conversation we've been having with Barbarians recently. Happens as our kids graduate through. So my son is a junior. One of the other, there at the beginning coaches, his son is whatever the one before junior is, sophomore. Thank you. I still don't speak American school. So we really only have, 1 or 2 more years of that pre-matriculation coaching commitment. I have actually been threatened that I'm not allowed to leave when my son graduates. But inside that, there is this concept of how do we bring coaches through? How do we... Because we have young players arriving with coaches or dads and mums who've coached, and they want to be involved, and they almost feel you can see this hesitation to offer to help because there's 6 or 7 coaches floating around already, and it's trying to make sure that barrier is not there and the door is wide open. That if you want to coach, we want you to coach.
Yep.
We'll work with you to make sure that you understand what we believe of the rugby program's about and how you guys can fit in or how they can fit in. But yeah, building longevity and continuity is really critical. And 7 or 8 years in feels to be the right time to make sure that that's been put in place, because that's when those first coaches, players are going through.
Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. And in having too many coaches, I struggle with that thought because I love when I was in circumstances where there were 4 or 5 coaches around a particular drill, and the assistant coaches, and I've played that role, particularly in selections camps. I don't mind, and I see how the thing works so much easier when I'm there just sort of helping move bodies around, or a ball's dropped, oh, I'll pick it up and put it back where it goes. So it's not like, there shouldn't be a barrier that says, well, I'm here already and don't come over here try to help. No, the more people that go in and help, the better. Obviously, if they're not getting in the way, and then it builds in that longevity. But it brings me back to the statement that Matt made, and it's kind of it's bearing itself into my brain. Matt, you said that you would feel uncomfortable with bringing that degree um, liability in allowing parents to just jump in and help, and you said it's something that a community-based team doesn't have to worry about. So I'm assuming that you would probably not feel comfortable. You and Kate would not feel comfortable with a parent that steps up and says, "Oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to drive my son. I'll drive 6 other kids to the game." In a community-based team, we wouldn't think twice of it. It's like, yeah, of course, yeah, that's the way it works. But I'm thinking from your perspective, you'd probably be like, oh, you know what? I'm not sure I feel right about that.
Yeah, I have to have signed waivers for that.
Right, exactly. And what I'm thinking is when you're talking about liability, I mean, yeah, there's the liability that, or there's a liability that comes from not fulfilling the requirements around a bureaucratic system, right? But if you're talking about like true liability, like true danger,
I think
the danger's still there. Like I think
right.
for a
I
community,
think what it comes down to is really kind of 2 factors. One is something people really don't understand, that schools, municipalities, but schools specifically, have a much higher level of liability and responsibility than other organizations. So if I'm the rugby coach and I let mom drive 4 kids and she gets in an accident and 2 of the kids get whiplash, like, that is a team issue for a high school. If you do that in a club, your club has no responsibility for those kids getting to their game. But in a high school, your high school does have responsibility for those kids getting to their games. Schools actually do carry more liability than clubs. And the other factor, when you look at a club team, generally speaking, everybody involved in that club team, all the way up its administrative structure, cares about rugby. In schools, I care and my assistants care. Hopefully my athletic director cares. My principal might care some. My superintendent probably doesn't care very much. My school committee probably only says they care, but like eventually you get to a point where they're saying, well, rugby's not super important to me. If this is going to be a problem, I'll just do away with it.
right? Yeah, I think the point that I was the point that the thing that was bearing itself into my head is the idea of somebody one group, the high school version versus the community version having more liability than the other. And my thought is, well, if that same parent gets into an accident and it hurts children, uh, children got hurt. So I'm wondering if community-based teams need to be paying more attention to see how schools are doing it, and take pages from that book. I know when we were talking about COVID, there's many clubs. At our club, we sat around and we boy, did we take that seriously. We took it seriously to the point where I think we were more restrictive than what some high schools were or some schools were allowing. So it's not so much a question of liability, or one has more liability to the other. The outcome, the catastrophic outcome from your decisions are still going to be there. It's just that in high school versus community, they're kind of seen slightly different. And that when you said that, I kind of thought, well, no, but there's still risk involved, whether you're in one system versus the other. And I'm wondering if, community-based teams need to be more aware of how high schools are doing it, or how schools are doing it, and take some pages from the book and say, you know what? Yeah, we can't just sort of wave our hands at some of these things because.
Daniel, I think it's quite different, isn't it? I mean,
Tell me.
The scenario. I'm speculating, but the scenario Matt describes of, it's an away game. We've got to get to the game. So as a coach of a community team, I tell the parents and the players, this is where the game is. I'll see you there.
Right.
Who's coming?
Right.
And that's it. My involvement starts when they arrive. Now, if they all choose to come together on the back of the roller skate down the middle of the highway, guys, think a little harder. But it's not my responsibility, other than as a fellow human and a reasonably decent citizen. Whereas I think in Matt's case, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, when you tell the kids we have an away game, your responsibility starts at your school.
Correct.
And it starts when you get back, and it stops when you get back to your school and the parents pick them up.
When the parents pick them up, which, I've had we get home and it's snowing out and I'm sitting with the kid out in the snow for 2 hours waiting for mom to show up, because if I put him in my car and take him home, it's a massive risk for myself.
Yep.
Well, so we live I live in fear of the same thing, but not in the car accident component there, but just to make sure there's no risk in the unfortunate scenario that you've got one adult, one child, and no tiebreaker. Effectively. So, but my responsibility starts on the fields and stops on the fields.
Yep, good point.
And I don't have to get there, and so I don't disagree with all the concerns of where the liability. Of the liability doesn't really change in absolute terms for the individuals involved, but in terms of responsibility, the parents own the liability for us as a rugby club. Whereas I think Matt owns the liability as the head coach.
The school does.
The school does. Sorry, yeah. I was trying to blame Matt, but I'll accept the.
It was probably
no. Well,
whatever it
and
was.
To your point, there's something like, oh man, I can't even let kids drive themselves places. So everyone has to be on a bus. Basically, it's the way that my athletic director works, and that is for everything that we do ever. And it can be expensive if we're doing something that's like extra, like outside of, like if I'm doing a joint practice with somebody, like I'm paying for that extra. That's not something that's in my like required. I'm sorry, my required schedule.
True. Yeah.
Yes.
But the bus does add to the camaraderie. I mean, there's nothing to beat the pre-game singing, the post-game singing, the prep on the bus, etc., etc. It's there's a certain something I think about being on the team bus going to a game.
I do agree with that. I've had a lot of kids. I've had years where most of the older kids tried to go home with their parents, and the team just doesn't gel like it does the years where, like, no, everybody's coming home on the bus, and we're gonna joke and laugh and make fun of each other, and there's something to be said about that. Absolutely.
I thought we all buoyed each other's characters and told each other what great games we had, and were highly supportive and very constructive insights. That's what happened when I rode on buses, at least.
I didn't grow up in that country.
This is kind of it's like a slight offshoot, but I was thinking, Daniel, like for a variety of weeks, you've been like, who coaches high school? Because high school practices at a ridiculous time, right? Which is to say that like some of the more steady programs have a teacher that is a coach, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so then as I'm listening to Alan and Chris talk, I'm like, oh man, all of these community programs have parents that are starting the programs and coaching the programs. And like, there's no adult that is a non-parent that's starting an elementary school youth program usually, right? Like that's not normally what we're seeing. And so these are just two different pools of interested adults
that
are starting things for different reasons. It's, I don't know, like how do we merge those?
I think we're starting it for the same reason, aren't we?
Yeah.
In fact, exactly the same reason, but it's just there's different ways we can trigger it. I thought, didn't we establish, Matt, that you've done all of these things, all of the above?
I haven't started a youth rugby program, but I've coached with no league organization, with Myro, with MIAA. I've coached men's rugby, and I've started a men's program. But I haven't started a youth program, which I think starting a men's program, starting a youth program are probably different beasts.
Yeah, it's got to be a lot easier to start a youth program.
Actually, to give you some more credit though, Matt, I know it's the entire organization of the Anchors, but the Anchors have started a high school program, and you're around it. You may not be directly responsible for it, but to give you just some extra credit, you are involved in the scenario where you're starting high school teams, the Anchors summer high school team, and
my rugby tree is starting to spread its branches.
Right. There's not much more space for you left to grow into, Matt. You know, you're the complete rugby person.
You've seen pictures of me lately, huh?
That's right.
It's not been nice, I'm saying.
That's right. Prop Weekly, I think it's called, isn't it? Is that an appropriate time to segue away from the personal insults because we're not on the bus and move on to Chris's story too? Other rugby programs I've started in my spare time. This segue is now called.
Yeah, again, I did not start this rugby program either.
Rugby programs I've hung around while other people did all the hard work.
They did all the hard work.
Exactly.
At the end with my clipboard.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I don't want to take credit for the other one, but the other one I have to go back a little further. And what I think what it's most fair to tell you is what my perspective was, maybe exaggerating a little bit into my wife, who actually was more involved in the creation of the program, at least from its inception. And then I took over. So, but I'll say this. So I have a perspective about what it was like to start a high school program that wasn't a single school. It was multiple schools. And what it was like to be involved in the inception of that program in Oregon under, at the time, in 2002, was Oregon Youth Rugby. So because because I think this was ideal for me. So I just want to maybe give an anecdote of like what I think near perfection looks like. So first of all, when we started this multi-school based, it wasn't part of it isn't part of the Scholastic organization. This multi-school based program. They had a boys team, and it wasn't too long after, maybe just 1 year later, some girls got together and said, we want to start a team. And we had particularly one that I recall, but more than one, really motivated, influential student who was able to gather together 20 players between multiple schools, maybe 30 eventually. That was really important too, right? Like that was a big piece of the puzzle about what made this work quite well. And the next thing we had was Oregon Youth Rugby. I can't impress upon you how easy I thought it was with Oregon Youth Rugby. I don't remember ever dealing with registration or money or anything like that, right? It was like, or like all the registration and all that stuff went through Oregon Youth Rugby. I never had to collect anything. Oregon Youth Rugby ran everything, and then they gave me a book, and that book was basically like, here's an example lesson plan. You know, here's your schedule. Here's when the coaches clinic is. Here's when the referees clinic is, when we're going to get our coach and referee certification. It was here's the emergency, here's the waivers, here's the emergency contact information, and all this stuff is in a binder, this magic binder. This was back in the days where we had paper, but when we used to we had these paper binders, and all that we really had to do administratively is maintain the binder. We just had to make sure the binder was with us at the games, and we just had to maintain that binder. Everything else was run by the state organization, and as far as I recall, Oregon was the first state that had an organization, and everything was run through them. So I think they are the 501c3, and that our local club in Lynn, which is now, by the way, called the Lynn Benton Lions, at the time was Corvallis, Oregon, but our local club didn't have to worry about any of those things. We just told the state-run organization we want to have a team, and I'm not exaggerating when I said, okay, you can pick up your bag of balls, and everybody gets a ball, and you can pick up your jerseys. They assigned us jerseys that weren't color coordinated with our town, but that's okay. And they gave us the binder and the information, and part of their plan, their binder was like, you will call a parent meeting, and this is what you're going to talk about in the parent meeting, and you're gonna and there, it's a good example of like what that binder included, what the information, the infrastructure that they developed included. And then we just showed up for game days and played, and it was that simple and straightforward. I think Oregon Youth Rugby had some advantages. I think they had some funding. They had a benefactor, I think, which probably helped out with this. But ultimately, that was my experience. And there was the experience in starting a multi-school club in Oregon. I'm going to pause there to reflect on my thoughts and make sure I didn't miss anything.
I gotta say, I think that is outstanding.
Yep.
And if anybody from Oregon's listening, like, congratulations and thank you. Right?
Well, and they don't need, what, I actually wanted to give a couple more shout outs. First of all, as far as I know, Oregon is, they're arguably the most successful program with somewhere in the order of, for a relatively small state, not small in population, 20 girls teams, over 20 boys teams, and continuing to grow, and really good representation at the higher levels. The national development pathways and that sort of thing is really good. And also, the person who's running that program also was part of the founding team for Girls Rugby Inc. as well. So they've done a lot of good things. They deserve the accolades and the success they've had. But I think the point is that here we are 17 years later, Rugby Oregon's still thriving, still a top-notch organization in youth rugby organizations across the country.
I'm going to look online. So, do you still have that binder by any chance? Because suddenly I'm very curious of what's in
Yeah.
that binder, and I'm going to look online
No.
and see if they have that now up on their servers, for people to download.
I'm I very much doubt that I have that binder. You know what though? Maybe Jen does. And again, and we'll see. We'll see if we can figure out some of the contents that mattered. I just spouted off a few that were important to me. And again, one more thing I want to talk about again about what was successful about that club. Why I think that the starting of that club was successful. What did we had? We had a state organization that was firing on all cylinders, right? That had all this infrastructure that was really helpful for us. Two, we had students that were athletes. They were good athletes and they were influential. And these students are the ones who did the recruiting. I don't remember ever recruiting or writing any recruiting process or doing anything like that. The students did all that on their own. Again, one thing about this was a girls' high school team. I did also help with the boys' team, but the boys' high school team was already there. So there was sort of a rugby community building. So that was helpful. I think, Kate, you sort of mentioned a similar situation with starting your girls program back in the day. And then we also had a rugby community, Corvallis, Oregon, in the early 2000s. Had tons of rugby players. I don't know. They were imported from New Zealand primarily, and then we also had a local university. So we had tons of available, willing coaches. We're talking about college students, and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of help, and just a lot of people like me to pick from who could actually coach that team. And then when I moved on, somebody came in and continued to coach the team as well. And now I think it's coached by not transient college students, but more steady. But the point was that there was quite a big, a robust rugby community there that was not going to let that program fail. Those, I think, are some of the key pieces of the puzzle for what I consider to be successful in Linn, Benton counties, Oregon's from 2002 to today.
Chris, the program, I'm sorry if I missed this, but it wasn't because you guys worked with Rugby Oregon. None of those youth teams were necessarily affiliated with a particular adult team, right? They were under the umbrella organization. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about the teams that were in there. I'd say none of them were associated with an adult team. Some of them were single school, but they were, you understand, they weren't associated with the interscholastic program.
Yeah.
But I can't think of any in Oregon that were part of an adult team. It just so happens that we played in our league. We played against Washington teams, and some of the Washington teams did have names that were the same as adult teams.
Yeah.
But I think I would suffice it to say that generally speaking, no, it was all conjured up from the students.
That isn't so different around here, though, is it? I mean, we obviously have Mystic and Wolfhounds who both have teams, but most of the youth who really stretch into youth, not just high school programs, there is no associated adult team.
Well, it's funny because I think we've talked in previous episodes about like what is a deterrent to growing the game. Sometimes I think that a deterrent to growing the game is that the adults that care, the adults that are willing to like passionately throw a lot of their time into developing rugby at any level are often affiliated with a particular program, and it potentially influences how they interact with other passionate adults. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's like a thing that I've been thinking about a lot,
I think
so if you look at
also just a limited ability, what I, after talking with you guys quite a bit about this, I think one of the reasons it's tough to get men's players, or adult players, I should say, men or women, to start coaching youth is they've already put so much time and effort into helping run their adult club that they're just drained and they don't feel like they have anything left to give to starting up a youth program.
I think that's actually a critical insight, Matt. And I was about to make something similar as a comment, was that, if you look at the Sharks and you look at Rentham, neither of them were founded by a player or a former player who was associated with an adult club. They were both founded by people who had rugby in their past, who wanted to, bring it forward. I don't know whether Dan brought his own children into the game, or just founded the program on his.
He didn't have children, right?
Yeah, but so I wonder whether that's an insight that we don't need to over-rotate on, but it's worthy of thinking through. Do we not need to look to the people who devoted their adult playing life and that to organizing an adult club to then go on and start a youth club when they have children? Do we want to look to people who have stepped away from the game for a couple of years and are now coming back because they have children? Are they the people who work at next?
No, I did not start a club. I walked into a club that already had some structure to it, and I love the fact that I all I needed to do is walk forward into it and bring my kids into it. But I definitely got involved with coaching for the Barbarians. If I had seen the Barbarians 5 or 10 years earlier while I was still playing, and if I was playing and having, raising kids at the same time, I would not have been involved. I would have, dropped the kids off to go play, and then I would have gone to my games. Even then, a couple years after that, after I stopped playing, I think I would not have been involved. But I think enough time had passed that the passion was still there. I did help start, some clubs in Waltham. Um, but I think enough time had passed that I wasn't exhausted anymore, and the youth club just seemed just so much of it is just a lot easier. A lot of it is it's a lot more difficult. There's a different set of skills there, but to me it was just very refreshing, and it seemed a lot easier than getting involved with a men's or a women's club all over again. So for me,
But again, for you, the experience was step away, refresh, come back.
exactly. And that's what I have in mind as the key folks, to be able to help are the people that are retired from rugby. They've been out for 10 years, that have disappeared. Go find them, bring them back in, and that'll keep them engaged with the club or keep them engaged in rugby.
Yeah, I think that's a great angle.
Now we just got to work out where they are so we can advertise to them. Formerrugbyplayers.com. Big website, huge following.
Yeah, well, I think there's a Facebook group that's actually full of them right now.
Quite a few of them nowadays, I would think.
Well, with Facebook nowadays, I don't play for Providence anymore, but I'm part of the group there. And I think, 20 years ago it was a lot harder to keep track of, who had played for you and be able to get the word out to them that something was happening. I think nowadays I'd be interested in finding out how gatherings for old boys being put on by their former clubs, be it, the 50th anniversary, the 55th anniversary, the 40th, or however many. I wonder how much more how much more successful they are now at getting older players to show up, where somebody just needs to send it out to Facebook. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, you had to know the one old boy who was keeping track of the list. And if you weren't in with that old boy, he may or may not send that email, that communication out to everybody on his list. And that list might be phone numbers, and they'd have to sit there and make phone calls, So I think technology I think it's making it a lot easier now to get in contact with the former rugby players that disappeared, that are gone. What's that?
It's funny you say that. So the South Shore Anchors just turned 20, actually 21 now. And we were going to have a big anniversary party, which unfortunately got canceled mostly because of COVID. But I was the guy who was responsible for finding everybody. And yeah, finding all of the players from the last 10 years, pretty easy. Pretty easy. Social media, whatever.
Yep.
Finding the players from the 10 years prior to that got increasingly challenging, especially the first few years where we weren't super organized. The older guys, the guys who actually had some rugby experience, finding them was close to impossible.
Yep, I can imagine. So I'm hoping, finding those lurkers through Facebook might be an easy way to find a good stock of coaches that have the skills, or at least enough skills to be able to dovetail quickly into a youth club that are not. They're not doing anything right now. They're not playing, and they're probably done, or they're at a stable place in raising kids that they have a little bit more time. So,
and then it's learning from what Chris said about Rugby Oregon. If you can make it a case of dial this number, we'll drop off the bag with the instructions and the jerseys and the balls, cones and flags.
Can I ask a question from the guys who've worked in the early years of youth clubs? Do you think it is beneficial or even maybe necessary to have a division of labor along the lines of administrative paperwork, dues, fees, all that, and then on the field, rugby?
We didn't need it when we started, only because I think all that backroom stuff was mostly done by the rec, and then when we started hitting SIP and had to start registering through Miro, we felt the strain because of the complex, not complex, the unnecessarily complex process of registering for Myra, registering through SIP, etc. But in general, no, it was we could survive. It wasn't great.
That's interesting. I've never been in a situation where I had that, administrative type person. It sounds wonderful.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. We didn't have one. It was, and I say from personal experience, because I distinctly remember going through the Myra registration process and writing it down and sending it out to all the parents. This is how you register your kid. By the way, remember, use your name here. Don't use your kid's name here.
Yeah,
etc.
A couple times.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping. Well, I mean, maybe a little too specific, but the whole integration with things like Sport Lomo hopefully makes it much simpler for everybody involved. But again, as I keep telling our parents, we're rugby players first and foremost, and all this other stuff is, well, we just accept we have to do it.
The funny thing, thinking about it, the funny thing to me is that, I've had a number of people over the years tell me like, oh, I would definitely help, but I really just don't know enough about rugby. And I feel like there's a niche for that guy or girl. There's a lot you don't need to know anything about rugby to help me, organize jerseys and order new balls and get kids sipped and figure out how much we need to charge for dues and like all of that administrative stuff, sending emails, scheduling field time.
Well,
that's
Matt,
where we're finding parents who are getting enthused or becoming invaluable. We had a guy show up and say, "Wow, I've never heard of rugby, and I'm working, Marcom. How can I help?" Well, actually, he had heard of rugby, but he'd never heard of us until his wife discovered us or something. So, just go, great, you can do our Marcom because clearly we need some. This problem is not obvious. Is not an obvious how to solve. And so we're seeing that happen now, 6-7 years in.
Right, and I think I'm gonna piggyback on that a little bit because I think we have sat around and thought, well, how can we use Matt? I think we've had the same thought as you, Matt. How can we use these parents that are energized that want to do things, but maybe we're not at a place where we're good enough to figure out what to do with them. But we have started using them, and I think it has been done to some success. Alan, help me. We had a fairly big jamboree a couple of years ago, and I think where all the responsibilities for putting a jamboree together, making sure the field, connecting with the rec department to make sure that the fields and the police and emergency all was there. Another big part was food, making sure that we had food there, raffles, to be able to take advantage of the fact that people are going to be running around with money and being able to do a little bit of raising funds. I think at one point we took some of the responsibilities and pushed it to some of the parents, and I think we benefited from that, right? Didn't we get some success from that?
Yeah, that's a crass understatement. 2018, we did it all ourselves. All the coaches did it all ourselves, and and it was a success. And we struggled in 2019 to let go. But the things we let go of, the parents did fantastically at, much better than we did when it was just us. So yeah, I think that was a learning lesson for us, that just because you're a parent doesn't mean you're incompetent.
Yeah. One area where I've always had success throwing, or I've had the most success with delegating to parents is fundraising. When Marshfield lost its school funding for a couple of years, one of the parents who had been very big in our town hockey program, her son had switched over to rugby and was quite a player. And so all of a sudden we lose our funding. I have no idea what to do. I'm a 24-year-old, I can barely feed myself. Never mind take care of all these kids. And she took over the funding, and I honestly, I don't know what she did still. But next thing I know, we had 10 grand in the bank, and it was absolutely outstanding. The work she did was wonderful. Unfortunately, as it progressed year to year to year, not every parent is as savvy with fundraising and money. And we had one year where we had I think, $7,000 in our bank account, and the parents used 5 of it to buy 500 logo Marshfield High School logo balls. And they're like, well, we're buying them for $30. You can sell them for $35, and you'll make $5 a ball on 500 balls. That's, you'll make $2,500. I'm like, I agreed, except you know how long it's going to take me to sell 500 rugby balls? I mean, you're talking 10 years, 12 years worth of selling rugby balls. And they just didn't get that aspect of it. Yeah, I still have probably 3 dozen of them in my basement.
That's embezzlement, isn't it?
I use them only for the team.
I think he was bringing that up because he wants us each to buy a rugby ball. That's what I got out of that.
That's what I heard. That's definitely what I heard.
They're vintage, so they're
So they're $10 extra now. They're $40 a ball now because they're collector's
Inflation.
items. There's only a few left. The other ones are worn out, and these are pristine.
There's no more coming. These are collector's items.
Exactly, it's still in the original
Well,
bag.
listen, I know we're also running out of time, but I said this in the chat offline, but I think this might move into our next conversation about how do we talk to different institutional heads in schools and in towns. But I'm still fascinated by and really thinking about field space, because I think that's such an interesting barrier to all athletics. It's still the thing that adult programs lament, but also the piece that we have the hardest time, if you're doing a community program, which for summer, I'm often trying to run that. And it's still, that piece I want to kind of talk about. Maybe that's something that we can, I don't know, that I can pick your brains about next week. Or in 2 weeks, rather.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's something that, if we're talking about some of the differences and similarities between a school-based team versus a community-based team, I think obviously you go about it differently. And I think if you're talking about a larger community, meaning a team that's got everything from youth and also has adults, we've talked about it in the past. We wonder, because you are going to be looking for field space, it's very different to go to the town and say, we need field space for our men's or women's rugby team, versus, hey, could we please have a space for the youth to do their rugby? And by the way, since it's available, could we also use it, for a game or for an adult practice, type of thing. So we wonder if it opens the door. And that's another huge difference that you would have with starting a community-based team versus a high school team or a school-based team. You do have the different age groups, and you might be able to leverage, the resources that having little cute kids might open the doors to, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
We've certainly talked about
That's
it.
a hard sell, though, isn't it? You're selling, I've got these little angelic darlings who just want to learn to play rugby. They're all 7 or 8 years old. And by the way, don't worry about these 30-something-year-old overweight dudes who haven't shaved in 13 years. They're just there.
They're angelic too.
They may have been angelic
Cherubian.
formally. And it may be cherubian in shape.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't go any further than that.
All right, so that's a lot of discussion around starting a community-based team and some of the differences from the episode we talked about last week, and some of the struggles that a community-based team would have that a high school team wouldn't have, and vice versa. Any last things about a community-based team? Benefits of starting one of them, or things to watch out for, or did we hit just about everything we wanted to hit?
I think the key message is just do it.
Exactly. Just do it. Go find people that are passionate and want to help, right? Sorry, Matt, I cut you off.
I would just say, just do it. Doesn't matter where you want to start your team. Start it. Whether it's in a school, in a club that exists already, starting it from scratch, build it and they will come.
That's right.
Exactly. You know what? I don't think anything more needs to be said. So I think with that, we're going to probably just go ahead and sign off. Right, guys?